You are listening to Spotlight Sessions with Justin Bamforth. The program provides an inside look at the creative field through exclusive conversations with industry professionals. Every episode is recorded live each month in the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Check out the show links to learn more and join for free. This episode was previously recorded before a live listening audience. My next guest is someone who lives at the intersection of art, technology, and pure imagination. Tanya Gupta is a New York-based multimedia art director whose vibrant, surreal photo manipulations have become a signature style for major fashion and tech brands. But before she built her studio, Tanya, and before she earned a spot on the Forbes Under 30 list for art and style, Tanya was, an aerospace engineer at NASA. Yes, NASA. Her creative career officially took flight when she was selected for the Adobe Creative Residency, a pivotal moment that enabled her to transition from engineering into art direction, where she built an exceptional portfolio and launched a business that now collaborates with some of the world's most recognizable brands. Her work, inspired by everything from comics and retro futurism to the early internet, celebrates the power of the female spirit through bold color and visual storytelling, and it's been featured in Harper's Bazaar, Teen Vogue, and beyond. Tanya, I am thrilled to have you here. Finally, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin, and thank you for such a stellar introduction. You really touched upon all of the major points, so I appreciate that. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Of course, it is going to be an otherworldly, out-of-this-world conversation and other space puns. You have one of the most fascinating creative origin stories I've ever heard, starting in aerospace engineering and ending up in art direction. So let's rewind to the very, very beginning, the big bang of Tanya's career. What attracted you to aerospace?
Well, honestly, it was a trip to Johnson Space Center when I was, I think, 8 years old. I have some family that lives in Houston, so we did like a little family field trip to Johnson Space Center, and that's when I first got to see an astronaut suit in real life. And I saw moon rocks for the first time and models of the Apollo capsule, and I kind of immediately knew that that was what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to study, at least. So that started my track towards studying aerospace engineering in undergrad at NYU, which is my alma mater. So I did all of the kind of prerequisites throughout high school, which involved taking all the, advanced science and math courses and every summer program that you could think of. And then that led me to studying engineering in college and going kind of the majority of my undergrad career without any real work experience, but it was my second semester of my senior year that I was offered a position at NASA to do a year-long co-op rotation. I did two separate rotations. One was over in California in the middle of the Mojave Desert, truly the middle of nowhere, on an Air Force base at what's known as NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center. And then my second rotation was a more well-known center, Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, which is known for most of the rocket launches. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to aerospace engineering in the first place, which now, of course, feels like a past life, but is very much a part of my origin story, like you said.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you also helped launch the AR/VR lab at NASA and co-authored a patent for a 3D modeling conversion tool. And all of this while you were an intern there?
Yes, that's correct. So I helped launch the Augmented and Virtual Reality Lab at Kennedy Space Center. It was in its first year, I believe, when I joined in 2018. And I was part of a team of 3 engineers. 2 of us were interns, 1 was full-time, and then our mentor who actually launched the lab on his own. And this tool that we co-authored, this patent, was something called a rapid model import tool, which you can actually download. It's publicly available on the NASA repository. Although now, of course, it is 7 years old, so I'm sure there have been many other iterations since my time there. But Basically, the point of this tool was that it would allow engineers to bring in high level 3D engineering models meant for actual structural design, the kinds that you could take a cross section of the 3D model and you would see all the nuts and bolts of the insides of this piece. And then you could kind of basically click a button to translate that 3D model into a mesh based model. And anyone who is familiar with video games or 3D modeling for animation is familiar with mesh based modeling because that is largely how 3D models are rendered in animation. And the reason for that is just that usually when you're seeing a surface representation of a 3D object in a game or on a screen, you don't necessarily need to have all of that internal data about what it looks like inside. Another thing that I love to mention when I'm describing this is, in the early days of video games especially, when you would get too close to a wall or too close to an object and it would kind of cut off and then you'd be inside of it, but then there'd be nothing there. That is a representation of a mesh-based model. And the reason why we developed this tool is because NASA had such an enormous repository, as you may expect, of every single engineering piece that they've ever made, from the space shuttles to just like tiny little biometric domes. And they wanted to have a way to bring in those 3D models into virtual reality to show potential clients or just to give feedback to internal teams. And the rendering power, the rendering capabilities of virtual reality, especially back then in 2018, were pretty low. So this tool allowed us to take those really intense, like huge files and decimate them down so that we could actually see them more clearly in virtual reality.
And you also worked on a Martian aircraft, and a prototype bearing your signature is sitting in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, correct?
Yes, that's true. The Prandtl M, that's the name of the aircraft. PRANDTL-M. And it was a subset of a larger project called Prandtl D. And my mentor, Albion Bowers, actually developed this shape of a wing that allowed for a glider to maintain speed and height without any external forces. No jets or anything like that. It was for a cargo aircraft, basically. So my project, Prandtl M, was taking that same design of the aircraft, but applying it to the Martian atmosphere. So when I was in the middle of the Mojave Desert, like I mentioned, we were running 100,000-foot flights of this prototype model, deploying it from a larger Cub aircraft and kind of gathering data about how the aircraft fared. Because in the desert at 100,000 feet is, as close as you could possibly get to Martian conditions for the testing that we were doing. So yeah, the prototype of that aircraft, Prandtl D, the larger project, bears the signatures of everyone who ever worked on it, including all of the interns that I worked alongside, myself included. And yeah, it was sent to the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., which is where it currently sits.
Wow. Okay. So now you understand her background, audience. So, very impressive individual here. So, Tanya, you're having this great career with NASA, enjoying the fruits of your labor, but something else was brewing inside of you. This allure of art and design. At what point did you realize that maybe there was something else you're interested in life? Maybe creativity wasn't just a hobby, but the thing you wanted to maybe build your entire life around.
It's funny because now, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see it so clearly from childhood onwards that I always had creativity in me. But I think that I didn't realize that there would be an opportunity for me to actually pursue that for a career. In college, for example, I ran my own freelance photography business. NYU is notorious for having, drama students, music students, people who need headshots or plays that need promo posters. And I would take it upon myself to do all of that for my friends who were in those fields. And I also, surrounded myself with so many other creatives, even though I was spending all my days in these classes with other engineers, I always felt a little bit more at home with other creatives. And even when I was at NASA, I found myself taking on graphic design gigs just because, I would hear that another intern, their group needed something done, needed some poster or needed some sort of internal, branded material. And I would be like, oh my gosh, please let me do that. I would love to. Uh, and after I graduated, I ended up taking a job with IBM as a hardware developer. And even there, I was doing the same thing where any opportunity that I could to stretch my creative muscles, I would take work on, even if it was extra labor, even if it was unpaid, because I genuinely love doing it so much. And I think that that is what informed my decision to actually pursue it, because it was the thing that made me excited to wake up in the morning and go to work, which, engineering didn't always do that for me on its own.
We're going to get into each one of these different skill sets and talents that Tanya has, but since we only have an hour, we're gonna touch on as much as we can. But for a full understanding of her work, visit her website, guptanya.com. That's GUPTANYA.com. From there, you can follow her on Instagram, on TikTok. You can see her portfolio work there. But let's start with your photo manipulation work. All right. Because you've described it as this unique style that is inspired by your many passions: comics, aerospace, retro futurism, video games, and just that nostalgia of growing up alongside the early internet. In other words, you're my kind of person. But if you could come up with like a term for your style or a simple definition of this, I don't know, this visual universe that you've created, what would you call it?
Think the best way to describe it broadly is surrealist photo manipulation. So I really like to play with perspective, with like kind of uncanny lighting, space themes, of course, naturally. But yeah, surrealism kind of is at the forefront of everything that I do, and that's the kind of edge that I find myself including in every piece that I do, whether it is personal or if it's branded or if it's, completely separate from myself. That's kind of like my artistic watermark, if you will.
When did you really start to explore that more creative aspect?
That's a good question. I think I always had a desire to unlock that in my creative work early on, but I didn't have the tools to. I often like to tell people when I'm talking about my journey with Photoshop in particular that I actually opened Photoshop for the first time, I think probably in like 2015, and I promptly closed it. It was like, this is so overwhelming. There's way too much to understand here. It's a very difficult platform to just like immediately kind of jump into. And I was like, this is too much for me. I'm in school for engineering. I can't do this. But the truth is that the reason why I even opened it in the first place is because I wanted to do these surreal photo manipulations. Like my Pinterest feed has always had a pretty consistent look to it, and that it's a lot of other photo manipulation because that's where my inspiration lies. But early on, I was focusing mainly on just learning how to use a digital SLR and doing some kind of rudimentary color grading in Lightroom. My journey with Adobe started, pretty early, but my actual thorough understanding of Photoshop and beyond, the other Adobe Creative Suite, After Effects, Premiere, even the 3D tools, Substance and Stager, that came a little bit later. But I always had it in me for sure. And it was only during the pandemic that I actually had more time because of, as you know, we were all home. I had more time to explore that. And I opened Photoshop again and I put my big girl pants on and said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to watch some YouTube tutorials and give it the old college try. And I'm so glad that I did.
It's very daunting when you are opening up a new piece of software for the first time because sometimes there's too many options. It's like, where do you begin? Where do you start? What does your typical process look like when you're beginning these photo manipulations? Where do you start?
Mm. Well, one thing that I really love now that I'm an expert in Photoshop, I can kind of explain more of the things that were daunting to me to begin with. And I think, like you touched upon it, there's just so many options. But moreover, there are seemingly endless ways to do the same thing. You can make adjustment layers in a number of different ways. You can apply different filters in like so many different processes. So when I'm starting out, I I think I just start playing around with some of the things that I know best, like creating duplicate layers, creating masks, and like gradient mapping is really slept on, in my opinion. That's a tool that I use a lot in Photoshop because it allows me to change the entire color scheme of a layer to match my specific aesthetic. I think that if you take a look at my portfolio or even my personal life, if you saw my home or my closet, you would see that there's a very consistent color scheme to everything, and that's also a hallmark of my art, I believe. So when I'm starting out, of course, every image will have a completely different set of colors to it, but I try to narrow it down to my own personal aesthetic by using the gradient mapping tool and then really just like seeing where that takes me. Whether or not I end up using those layers later on is kind of immaterial. It's just a good starting point for me to like bring myself back to my own artistic home base, so to speak.
Tell me about the Adobe Creative Residency, because some of us may have heard this program before, but we may not be familiar with it. What is it?
So it has evolved quite a bit over the years, but when I joined in 2021, the Adobe Creative Residency was a year-long program that allowed people in their early creative career or folks who are trying to pivot, which was my case, to use the year as a way of building out their portfolio and at the same time also being somewhat of a brand ambassador to Adobe. We were provided with an annual salary, and then in addition to that, they also funded our portfolios. So when I applied to the program, I applied with a pitch deck that basically laid out what my intentions were for the year and what my budget would be, what the scope of my project or projects would be, and what I would need from Adobe to accomplish those things. And I was very lucky to have been selected. I was one of two residents that year, and my specialty was in Photoshop. And I used that year to build some network connections through Adobe. I built a client roster that I ended up working with post residency when I started my own agency, Tanya Studios, which I did less than a month after my residency completed. And I really do owe nearly my entire career at this point to that program because the financial stability and emotional stability, frankly, of knowing that I had uh, the support of this company and also kind of the support of the mentorship that I got through the program and being connected with other creatives, that continues to stand to this day. Even though my residency ended in 2022, I still continue to be very much a part of the community to this day. I meet so many other talented creators through this. I was just at Adobe Max a few weeks ago and I met so many cool people there, so many familiar faces. I get to do things like this with you. I very much continue my relationship with Adobe, and I owe a lot of it to the creative residency.
Someone just doesn't wake up one morning and say, "Hey, I'm out of this industry. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to do something totally new." I mean, yes, some people do that, but that is
It's
terrifying.
risky.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's risky, right? Thankfully, you had that stepping stone to kind of eventually make that transition, right?
absolutely.
What did that look like for you, making that transition?
So I applied to the residency program while I was still at my previous job. And then when I was accepted, I believe I only had maybe less than a month before the residency actually began. So I had a pretty short window of time to let my previous employer know that I was leaving, but they also totally understood. I mean, even my time at my previous job, like I said, I was taking on so many creative endeavors, and I think that it was pretty clear that that's where I shined. Um, and then, of course, when I started the residency, it was like we hit the ground running. And if you speak to any member of the alumni of that program, you'll know that it flies by. We had quarterly check-ins, and I felt like by the third quarter, I was like, can you guys just keep me for another year? Like, I feel like I have barely even scratched the surface of art direction and working on my own personal portfolio. But it was trial by fire, and then before I knew it, it was over. And like I said, I launched my company the following month after the conclusion of the residency. I was really lucky that I had made so many connections with potential clients that ended up being actual clients. Namely, like my biggest one that I had right out of the residency was Logitech. And my first gig with them was actually at Adobe Max 2022, where they brought me on to run Photoshop demos using Logitech products at the booth in person at Max. So it kind of felt super full circle. I was seeing a lot of the same familiar faces, but also being given a lot of autonomy and the space to share my own creative endeavors and my process and my workflow. Um, in a way that I was able to also meet people in real life and talk to them and engage with them about their own creative practices. And I think that that's like the most valuable thing out of all of this is just like the people, the humanity, the FaceTime that I get with other folks is truly so rewarding.
The creative community is something special. The advice that was given to me by one of my old graphic design instructors is that this is the one industry that you never retire from.
Mm.
You just keep being involved with it. You don't, well, he put it this way: you don't retire, you die. So
That's one way to look at it.
that's one way to look at it. Yeah. But I understood, what he meant by that is you're always creating, you're always learning, you're always connecting with somebody new in the industry. And it's fantastic.
Totally.
Let's talk about Guptana Studios. What were the early days like of running the studio and just getting it up off the ground?
I have to say, I was very lucky because in the first full year of running my studio, I was getting clients in my inbox pretty regularly. They were finding me, whether it was through work that I did for other clients or through my TikToks or just, word of mouth. Also, I started building relationships with third-party PR agencies that had their own client rosters, and those PR agencies were primarily in the fashion and tech space. I did also work with a few beauty brands, a few skincare brands, but I learned pretty quickly that the niche that I succeeded in the most was in fashion and tech. So it kind of snowballed, after Logitech, I did a couple of other campaigns. I did one with Nordstrom, with Uniqlo, with Away, with Aerie, and then those kind of led to other projects with other similar companies. And I think that the value of building those relationships early has carried me over the years because time and time again these clients come back to me for campaigns, especially specifically holiday campaigns or even AAPI, Asian American and Pacific Islander focused campaigns, because I myself am South Asian American. Um, it's been really nice to know that my social presence has so much to do with my visibility within the industry, which is definitely different from engineering, definitely different from the corporate world, where Oftentimes people are discouraged from exploring their social media presences or, living in that kind of world. But I've been very lucky that as a business owner and as an art director freelancing between New York City and LA, that having a voice online is celebrated and very much a way that I access clients and a wider audience.
Let's talk about one of these campaigns that you did because you started working then for the automotive industry, especially Toyota. So tell me about that campaign.
Oh, that was so much fun. To this day, maybe one of the most fun campaigns that I've worked on. Um, Yeah, so I was flown out to the headquarters in Dallas, and we got to shoot with an actual vehicle. They provided me with a crew, which was really exceptional because oftentimes I end up having to source lighting designers and videographers and photographers within my own network. But of course, I'm based out of New York, and they were based out of Dallas, so I got the opportunity to work with a whole new scope of people, and this was particularly for a campaign around the holiday of Holi, which is a Hindu holiday that celebrates color mostly. You may be familiar with like a celebration that happens every year where we throw colored powder at one another and kind of get covered in it. So that was really exciting because I got to mimic that celebration with the car. And that campaign actually did exceedingly well, so much so that I was reached out to by Kia, a competitor, and they asked me about my exclusivity clause and were like, "Hey, when can we work with you?" And it was luckily it was already over by that point. I was like, "Hey, I'm free to work on this with you if you'd like." So that's a really fun example of, sometimes you get swept up or you get kind of scooped by a client because they liked something that you did for one of their competitors. It's like, hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, that is amazing how one thing leads to another. And some of the commercial work that you created for some of these notable brands as well, like Nordstrom, Puma, Uniqlo, Aerie. What about these campaigns taught you the most about the art of visual storytelling?
Something that I really appreciate about the social media landscape in particular is how quickly everything happens, how rapidly you have to iterate on an idea, and then also how soon you have to actually execute on that idea, because the shelf life of an idea for a social media campaign is very, very short. And that stretched a muscle that I really enjoy. I love thinking on my feet. I love having a little bit of pressure. Uh, Certainly, there's a lot more pressure in social media. But even beyond that, the campaigns that I've worked on that are not for social media, the print and digital campaigns, um, I just really love being challenged. And I certainly do feel like working for these bigger clients, whether it's me putting pressure on myself or the clients putting pressure on me, I think it kind of raises the stakes higher and higher every time I take one of these projects on. And of course, it's super invigorating and really exciting when I get to work with a client that I've had on my vision board for the longest time and get to check that off my bucket list. But I learned so much from it because it certainly does sound very glamorous. It looks very glamorous, and it is very glamorous a lot of the time. But it's also grueling hard work, and there's countless nights of doubt and worry and anxiety and just trying to meet a deadline and get it done. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, this is what drives my passion. And this is what gets me excited to wake up in the morning to do this. And no matter how difficult these projects may be or how challenging they truly are fulfilling me beyond anything that I could have ever done. And how lucky I am to have found something that serves me like that.
When you came to this conclusion, was it at that moment that you then thought, okay, I made the right decision to leave engineering? Or is there always a little voice in the back of your head that says, eh, maybe you made a mistake?
I don't know if I will ever come to a place in my life where I'm like, I made the right decision. And that just comes from like humanity, you know? I think that we always question our own decisions. And there are certainly times that I miss using certain parts of my brain, you know? Like I miss using math and science in my everyday, sure. Um, but the truth is that I have repeatedly proven to myself and others that I can carve out the path that I want to pursue. And if the job description doesn't exist, then I will make it. And I think that this is no different. I think, like, right now, I'm at a comfortable point in my career where I'm confident and proud of the work that I've done, but I'm also reaching an inflection point where I'm looking forward and looking upward towards like what's next. And I think a lot of that has to do with finding an intersection of these two lives, these two beasts within me, you know, the intersection of art and technology or art and engineering. Um, I think that there are some questions that still are left to be answered for me when it comes to that. So I can't say with full certainty whether I am 100% confident in my decision to have made the switch, but I also certainly do not regret it. I don't think that I will ever regret making that choice. So I think it's very much it's not black or white. It just is.
I can't imagine it ever being a black and white world in your very colorful world. So that's a good thing. How do you really find your voice? Because that's something that creatives wrestle with all the time. How do we find our voices? How do we set ourselves apart from everyone else? How do you do it? Or what types of tips can you offer, especially to new designers who are trying to stand out in the crowd?
You know, I think there's probably two ways that I go about this, and I touched upon one of them earlier, which is my color palette. And this is specific to me. I recognize that because not necessarily every artist kind of finds themselves to one color palette. But over the years of working towards my artistry, I have always gravitated towards like a certain shade of pink, a certain shade of blue, a certain shade of yellow. And I know it doesn't sound like much, but that informs so much of how my artwork turns out. And that's why, if you look at my Behance page, for example, you kind of see a pretty consistent style, even though the work that I do ranges in its content. You can pretty much tell mostly that I made it because of the color scheme. So that's something that I cultivated on my own, you know, without even knowing it really. I just started identifying it by looking at my own Instagram feed after a few months of pursuing my creative journey and being like, huh, that's kind of crazy. Like, it all kind of looks the same. But I love that because there's a reason why I choose those colors. They make me happy. But in the same vein, the second tip that I would give to any creative is to try and remind yourself who you were when you were a child. What did you want? What were you drawn towards as a kid? Because oftentimes when I'm feeling lost creatively or scrolling Pinterest or Behance for hours for inspiration, I end up finding myself drawn towards colors, styles, ephemera, nostalgia for the things that I was drawn towards when I was a kid, where I was not yet influenced by the biases of the outside world. And even though I am obviously such a different person now as an adult, in a lot of ways, I'm just living my life to please 8-year-old Tanya. You know, like I want to make her proud. I want her to look at my work now and be like, that's so cool. I want to do that. So I think that that is like a North Star that pretty much everybody has, because everybody was young once. Everybody had hopes and dreams as a kid. And no matter where life takes you, that child is still within you. And that will always lead you back to home base if you're ever feeling lost about what your voice actually is.
Wise words right there. All right. So the audience may not know this, but in 2021, you helped launch Adobe Photoshop's TikTok presence from the ground up. Can you walk us through that process? And how do you think when you're creating for Gen Z platforms, things that you keep in mind?
Yeah, that was so much fun. Honestly, it was a really cool opportunity to get to be in the TikTok space at that time, because post COVID, so many people were on the platform and uh, so much stuff was going viral. It was pretty easy to reach a wide audience just simply by virtue of how many people were using it at the time. And of course, with a brand and a company like Adobe, like Photoshop, there was so much room for accessing the audience that already existed on the other platforms. So it was a little bit less daunting to approach the branded channels than, say, my own personal channel, because I was starting also from the ground up around that time. But working with the Photoshop teams while I was a resident was really exciting and made me feel like my voice was being valued. And I truthfully was able to access the Gen Z vibe by simply existing on the platform myself. I always think like when you're trying to reach a new audience that you're not familiar with, like the first thing that you should do is put yourself in their shoes and try to engage with them and understand what kind of content that they are consuming, and reading the comment sections and seeing what people were saying in there, what kind of humor existed there, paying attention to viral moments and having your finger on the pulse of like what is working here, what's funny here, what's not, what's a cancelable offense. Those were all things that we had to be really aware of. But something that I probably would have been doing on my own anyway. So it was super rewarding to also be able to apply my, like, I guess, several hours of doom scrolling that inevitably I would find myself doing, but like have it kind of count towards something meaningful in helping Adobe and Photoshop TikTok channels.
Let's shift gears toward another interest of yours, that being theater producing. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you spent 2 years producing theater, co-producing two all-female led plays that went off Broadway and then to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2023 and 24. How on earth did that chapter begin?
So I've been really lucky that anytime I have wanted to start a new endeavor, I have had another person who's already established in that space, like truly believe in me and kind of hold my hand through it. So I had a friend that I had made in college who was an actor. She was studying drama. Her name's Caitlin McNeilage. And she originally asked me to come on as an art director and set designer for a play that she was producing that she was intending to take to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Um, but then as we continued our conversation, she was like, "Would you have any interest in co producing this with me?" And I was like, "I honestly have no idea what that means. I don't know what that entails, but it sounds cool, you know?" And she explained to me that it carried a much bigger connotation in like the scope of the entire project, and that I would have a lot more um, room for my voice to like have an impact in the way that the play would pan out. And so we did our first play, which was called The Leading Lady Club, and it was all female led, all female cast. And we actually sold out off Broadway in New York when we did a New York Fringe run. And then we took it to Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where we put it on for, I think, about a week and a half. And we did sell out a number of those shows, not the whole run, but it was a pretty successful run, in my opinion. And we, got funding. We sourced funding for the entire project. It was completely independently funded. And we were able to also fly our entire cast and crew out to Edinburgh and pay for housing, lodging, accommodation, food, everything. In addition to also putting the show on. So the learning there was like this kind of scrappy DIY live entertainment aspect that was opening up an entirely new door for me because up until then I had primarily been focusing on digital and social, but it was scratching a new itch for me, this ability to have FaceTime with people and see audience reactions in real time, which was unlike anything that I had experienced before. So I did it again the following year, last year, 2024, and this was a different play, same playwright. And I had a wonderful time. I learned so much from both of those experiences. Ultimately, I think what I learned was that producing theater isn't necessarily what I want to pursue. Uh, I I learned a lot from it, but it is highly administrative in the job description, whereas I need something that is a little bit more creative, intensely creative. But that, that is a conclusion that I would not have been able to come to if I hadn't at least taken the chance to try it in the first place. And I'm so grateful to this community of women that I have in New York, in the theater space, who took a chance on me and trusted me with their voice in this project, with these projects. And so now I take my experience from that in live entertainment and immersive storytelling and try to apply it towards my own projects and even my own personal artistry with pop-up shows where I display some of my own artwork in New York and LA. I've created different 360 projections of my artwork. These are things that I otherwise probably wouldn't have learned if I hadn't spent 2 years in the theater world. But yeah, I'm very lucky that I got to do that.
Yeah, let's get into your artwork. In 2023, you displayed some of it at your first ever pop-up art show right there in New York
Yes.
City.
Yeah.
But there was one particular piece that people now flock to. Tell me about this.
Yeah, it is called The Birth of Parvati, and it is a modern recreation of Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, except that Venus, the Roman goddess of love, is replaced with Parvati, the Hindu goddess of love. And because I specialize in self portraits, of course, I decided to portray Parvati myself. And it was a lot of fun to do. I was dressed in my mother's sari and my mother's jewelry, which was very special to me, a deeply, deeply personal touch. She helped me take the photographs and create a digital composite of the many, many hands that Parvati has. And I used, like I said, my favorite tool within Photoshop, which is gradient mapping, to change the colors of the original artwork to this kind of psychedelic, surrealist, hyperpop, very colorful aesthetic. And it has become somewhat of a hallmark of my artistry. And even when I meet people who don't necessarily know me or are not familiar with my work at large, um, they may know me from this one piece because it is recognized, at least in the art circles in New York.
What's it like stepping into the fine art world after doing commercial work? Is there any difference?
Oh, big time. Yeah, it's tough. It's very tough, actually. Um, Interestingly, when I was in the Adobe Creative Residency, my mentor, Julia Tian, um, initially actually kind of discouraged me from pursuing the fine art track. And the reason for that was because there's a huge barrier to entry. It's very difficult to establish yourself in the fine art world simply because of the, I guess, demographics of the people who are involved in it. It's people who have, for one, most likely studied fine art in college or beyond. And then also, it has so much to do with your network. So, for example, in 2023, I attended Art Basel for the first time in Miami, which really opened my eyes to like truly the fine art world and what it entails to sell massive pieces of artwork for tens of thousands of dollars and to sign with galleries and display your work at these different conferences around the world. And while it's not something that I completely cast off as a potential for my future, I think that it is something that one must be very prepared to give it their all. You have to like really give it 100%. There's a lot of financial risk involved, flying out to these places and hoping that you will be able to sell it for a lot of money. The more that you establish yourself as a fine artist, the higher the likelihood that you can actually start selling your work at auction for higher amounts of money. But there's so much involved with uh, talking to the right people and establishing your name as an artist that it can be kind of daunting. And it still is daunting to me as well. And I think I try to merge my social media presence and just generally like being a public figure into my artistry and hope that those two worlds kind of collide and work on their own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, well, you know how it is. A lot of uninformed people tend to loop design and art together, and they're very distinct, they're very separate. Both are very challenging in their own respective regards, but they're different and the approach is different. Yes, there are some similarities, there are some commonalities, but they are different worlds.
Definitely.
Yeah, as Elizabeth says in the chat, art is not the same as design.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that you thrive in the tech and fashion space, and there is so much crossover between fashion, culture, and design. Yet I rarely see many designers tapping into this, but you do. What is it about fashion in particular and its connection to the art world that you appreciate?
Well, for one, I love clothes. I love fashion. I love to dress myself. Dressing in the way that I do is one of the ways that I express myself to the outside world on a daily basis. I think like the way that I dress is also a very clear reflection of my mental state, which I'm sure is true for a lot of people. But just having that passion on its own definitely drew me towards that world. But in addition to that, I also love that rapid iterative process that comes with the fashion world, with like the different seasons that come out. Every year, there's at least two new collections that come out from every major designer. There is a certain sense of camaraderie among people who are interested in the fashion space. I don't necessarily like to say that I keep up with trends because that's just simply not true. I don't keep up with trends, honestly. I just dress for me and I kind of express myself however I see fit. But I do like to keep up with what culture at large looks like. And fashion is such a clear representation of what's happening in the world. It's like when people say, oh, art is inherently political. I believe that. And I think like the way that we dress ourselves has everything to do with how we are imbibing the experience of living and like our environments around us. And I love that it's such a clear visual representation of that.
I remember when I was in school, I did one of my projects on Manolo Blahnik, the women's
Mm,
shoe designer.
yes.
Yes, and, people looked at me like, "What the F are you doing? Who is that?" And I'm like, "Look, he's a master craftsman, and I appreciate good design in all its forms." Now, granted, I don't wear women's shoes, but I know women who do, and my point being is that it's important to look outside of your industry, to
Mm.
recognize that there is good design and style in everything, which can influence your work as you draw inspiration from it. But what are some other places that you draw inspiration from?
First of all, I am obsessed with this fact that you just dropped on us like it was nothing. Love that you did a project on Manolo Blahnik. I am obsessed with Manolos. That's so cool. Um, where do I look to for inspiration? I did mention before that I lean so much towards nostalgia and like what was I interested in as a kid because oftentimes it comes right back around as an adult. But then when I'm looking for brand new fresh inspiration for stuff that I haven't already explored before, I genuinely love TV and film. I think that that's another fantastic representation of the world at large. and particularly following like filmmakers or editors that I really like, and seeing what they find to be important and what their visual storytelling language looks like. Um, Something that I've been doing recently, which is maybe unrelated to visual storytelling, but more just storytelling, is I have started picking up scripts, like screenplays for movies that I really like, the ones that I keep coming back to over and over again and rewatching. And it's offering me a brand new perspective on the filmmaking process in reading the scripts while I'm watching the films, because it gives me a deeper insight into what the writer or even the director was thinking when they shot that scene. And, uh, it may not necessarily immediately translate to the work that I do because I'm not a filmmaker yet, but it does give me inspiration for how I can better translate my abstract ideas that live inside my head and put them onto a piece of paper that another person who may not have any context for the vision that I have to be able to create that vision in their head as well. And then of course the fruit of that labor is the finished piece on the screen. So that's been something that I've been leaning a lot into lately.
To learn more about tonight's guest, Tanya Gupta, you can check out her website at guptanya.com. That's GUPTANYA.com. From there, you can follow her on all the socials, which I posted in the chat, or for those of you listening on demand, they're in the show notes. If we didn't get a chance to cover your questions, feel free to reach out to Tanya directly at either her website or on LinkedIn. Now, if you are new to the Adobe Creative Career Discord, I'd like to take a moment to share one of the coolest things we're working on right now, and that would be the Adobe Creative Apprenticeship Program. This program connects aspiring creative people like you with top creative companies, providing the actual training and experience that you need, which also looks amazing on a resume. Think of it like the ultimate internship meets mentorship opportunity. But wait, that's not all. You see, there is another aspect to the program, and it's called commissioned projects. This is where you can get even more experience working on an actual paid project with Adobe. Yes, that's right, Adobe as your first client. Seriously. The details on the Creative Apprenticeship Program, the commissioned projects, and more incredible career resources can all be found at behance.net/resources. That's behance.net/resources. But since we only have a few more minutes tonight with the woman of many skills and talents, Tanya Gupta, we're going to try to get to everything here. And one of those, actually two of those projects that you're working on right now, Tanya, is the virtual closet and the bobblehead fashion dolls. What are these?
Yeah, this is really exciting. This was a collaboration campaign that I did with Photoshop, particularly with its new features that just came out after Max. So the virtual closet is something that I have been wanting to work on for a long time, and I have kind of done iterations of it over the years, heavily inspired by the movie Clueless. Cher Horowitz's virtual closet. Anyone who's familiar with that movie will recognize her virtual closet is truly to this day one of like the pinnacles of, in my opinion, like the future innovation. So I wanted to kind of catalog my own closet in real life into a virtual landscape where I could kind of create outfits and see what they might look like on me, and just kind of keep track of the outfits that I like the most. And I used Photoshop to do that. In fact, I did it almost entirely on Photoshop on mobile, which is new for me because I primarily use only the desktop app. But I was able to just like really quickly and easily take photos of everything in my closet and remove the backgrounds in one click and create this beautiful virtual world that matches my aesthetic in real life. And it was so much fun to do, honestly. And I have actually been referring to it since then. Um, and then the second project, the bobbleheads, that was just a fun little campaign that I did where I took photos of myself again on mobile, brought them into Photoshop on mobile, and was able to do all of the same masking that I'm used to from the desktop, but just to do it by hand. I was able to just tap, use my finger, and uh, use the internal AI tools within Photoshop that select the subject and remove the background and make duplicate layers and adjustments and do all of the things that I could have done on desktop, but just like on the fly. And even when I went to Adobe Max recently, I was actually talking to people there about the bobbleheads, and they were like, I tried it in my room. Like right then, I took a picture of myself and I made my head really big and made my feet really big and made my body really tiny, and it looked really cool. So it's just really fun that other people also connected with it, and it's just silly, you know. Like it's so cool that I also like, in addition to working with these amazing brands and making really cool concepts for campaigns at large, I also get to just do silly stuff and share that with the world and get a voice for that too. So yeah, so much fun. Highly recommend that you try it.
That is part of the fun of being in the creative industry. You get to just experiment and play with tools and just go nuts. For creatives who want to pivot careers the way you did, what's the very first step you would tell them to take?
I would say to really assess your risks and make sure that however you're choosing to pursue this career pivot, that you're doing it in a smart way, that you don't completely abandon one part of yourself to do the other. And when I say assess your risks, of course, I also mean financial. You know, like in my case, the Adobe residency was able to keep me at the same speed that I was at before and match my engineering salary and cover my portfolio expenses. And that was a huge reason why I even did it in the first place. There's so many other residency programs out there. There's community grants, there's government funding. You know, it may be difficult to find, but it is worth exploring because seeking out a career as a creative can be incredibly destabilizing. And I don't want to influence anybody to abandon stability in an effort to pursue creativity. Um, but there are ways to maintain both of those things. And I think if you approach it with a pragmatic and smart attitude, you can actually accomplish everything that you want. But seeking out support is never a bad thing.
So let's talk about your website because we haven't gotten into that, and it's very unique. Elizabeth was visiting it and playing with the cursor that was moving all around.
Mhm.
What goes into building an optimal portfolio site? Because for those in the audience who have all these interests, like you, it's not easy to bring them all together or even organize them into some sort of cohesive manner. So, what's the best way to approach this?
You know, it's so difficult because I have bopped around between so many different website platforms and different uh, layouts for my portfolio. And over the course of my career, also, I've changed what I've wanted to focus on. For example, if you had visited my website when I was deep in my theater production era, it would have looked very different, right? I think that what it comes down to is knowing my audience and knowing like who am I expecting to visit this website. At the moment, my website is in my bio on my Instagram and my TikTok, which is where the majority of my audience finds me. So I try to tailor it towards them mostly, but at the same time, I also want potential clients to be able to get a holistic understanding of what my work looks like. So the first thing that I do is try to put myself in the shoes of whoever is going to be visiting the website in the first place. And then the next thing that I do is I seek out other creatives or other websites that achieve what I want to achieve. So for me, it might look like finding the art directors in different advertising agencies that I really admire and I really love the work of, and then seeing how they display the work that they have been doing over the last few years. What does their portfolio look like? What works? What doesn't? What do I like? And then try to emulate that in some way with my own work and make different versions and compare them to one another. I've been through so many iterations of the current website. Um, I got a little nervous when you brought it up because I'm like, oh, I have no idea what it looks like at the moment, to be honest. I check back in every few weeks and update things, but that's another part of it is to make it a part of my routine to keep checking in on it and making sure that it's updated. And if I've been working on something really exciting, to make sure that that's at the forefront, on the front page. Try to make it as easy for someone else as possible. Through this creative apprenticeship, actually, this mentorship program, I have been mentoring an undergraduate student in design with their portfolio. And one of the things that I told them that I think is just a great piece of advice for anyone in general, creative or otherwise, is whatever information you want someone to get from your website, you should try to do it in like the least amount of clicks and the least amount of scrolling as possible. Kind of like make it as simple as you possibly can. And I've heeded that advice. I think it has really like made my portfolio look a lot more succinct that way.
What misconception do you hear all the time about quote unquote being a creative that you wish you could debunk just once and for all? The reality of being a creative. What does that look like to you?
I guess there can be misconceptions by people who are not creatives themselves that it's just all play and no work. Or just because I enjoy what I do, that I don't also have hardships. And, I don't feel like I need to prove myself to anyone in that way, but it can be a little bit frustrating having conversations with folks who have, I guess more, I'm putting air quotes right now, serious or adult jobs, even though I consider my job to be very serious and very adult. But for what it's worth, I think that people should understand that no matter how fun and silly and goofy something might look like online or in print, there's so much work that goes behind producing that piece and the humanity behind it. I think that like putting yourself into the shoes of the creative kind of helps you understand that this is very much my livelihood. This is still what pays the bills, and it's deeply important to me. And yes, I derive a lot of joy from it, but it also is like my life's work.
Do you ever have some days where you're just not feeling confident in your own abilities? I mean, you've accomplished a lot. You're doing great things, but are there some days where you're like, man, I'm terrible at this. Maybe I should leave this too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you deal with it?
It happens more often than you would think. Imposter syndrome is real. And just self doubt is real. No matter how much I accomplish, no matter how many accolades I accrue, I I think that the bar keeps getting higher, right? And this is true for anybody who is ambitious and well accomplished. You set a goal for yourself, you work super hard to achieve it, then you achieve it. And then suddenly that thing that you had been working so hard to get towards is just now your baseline. And something else comes along, a new goal comes along, or a new height has to be reached. And then you go through the cycle again and you reach that height, and now suddenly the skyscraper feels like the ground floor. And that's something that I have to keep reminding myself whenever I have these ruts of self-doubt or these days where I'm like, oh, what am I doing? It's easier said than done because I'm the one living my life, but I try to put myself in the position of an outsider, just just a third party perspective into my work and remind myself that I have, lived through 100% of the days that I've had on Earth, and I will get through this one as well, and I will continue to accomplish the goals that I set out to do, as long as I just keep believing myself. As woo woo as it sounds, no one's gonna believe in me unless I do. So I just have to pull my socks up and keep pushing forward.
Speaking of woo woo, in the background, it sounded like there was a space invasion going on. Is that,
That is often what it sounds like. Unfortunately, it is just the sounds of the sirens in New York City. But yes, it sounds a little bit spooky, doesn't it?
yeah. Well, on that topic, I was going to ask this, since you know it's coming, and you know my
Mm-hmm.
interest in this. Since you have the NASA background, UFOs, also known as UAP now. Did you hear anything about this subject while you were employed with NASA? Asking for
Yes,
a friend.
I was also asking for a friend when I was snooping around and asking everybody that I worked with about their opinions on aliens and UFOs. Yes, I certainly had many conversations with people while I was at NASA, but I think the most interesting conversations that I had were with my roommate at the time. She was a meteorologist with NASA, and she used to go up in the plane and point the satellites towards the skies at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was like just such a cool job that she had. She'd been there for several years. She was a full-time contractor while I was interning there. And she had some stories about what she claims to have been like sightings of extraterrestrial life. And when she was telling me these stories, I mean, it was like truly very hard to believe because I'm a skeptic. And um, I thought, okay, well, if I'm speaking to somebody who has a PhD and works at NASA full time, surely, I should be taking this seriously. And the more she divulged to me, the more I could see how real it had been to her. There was a story that she had told about going onto the Air Force Base early in the morning for like a top secret project. And I'm sure there were details, classified details of the story that she actually didn't tell me. This is just what she was allowed to share. But there was a time where she was dropped off in a remote part of the desert. And as Edwards Air Force Base, which is where Armstrong Flight Research Center is a very, very large base. I don't know the exact square area of it, but it's huge. I mean, it's just like miles and miles of desert space. And so she was deposited in this part of the base that she was not familiar with. And it was very early in the morning and very dark outside. And she was, they pulled up to this airplane hangar, which is not completely out of the ordinary because it was an Air Force base. But as she arrived and started walking towards the hangar doors started to close. And as those doors were closing, she saw what she described as aliens. And to this day, I don't know what to make of this story because she also was somewhat of a prankster and used to like pull pranks on me. But this story, I had never seen her have such sincerity and like earnest, almost terror telling this, that it makes me wonder about what, you know, if this is what she could share with me off the record or on the record or whatever, like what else was there that either she or other people at NASA may know and not share? I was just a lowly intern. They weren't going to share that information with me, but I sure as hell was going to try and find it out on my own. But even in my time since leaving NASA, I've continued to have a vested interest in this topic. And for me, it's more alien life than UFOs, like where my interest lies, simply because I like believe in, the Fermi paradox. I don't think that it's possible that we are the only life in the entire universe. But I also think that maybe life outside of us might just look completely different. It could be interdimensional beings that we're not capable of even seeing, or it could be microscopic organisms. I mean, how would we possibly be able to tell what a life form could even potentially look like if we don't know what we're looking for, you know?
So, a lot of questions on that. You mentioned this was at Edwards Air Force Base. Uh, do you know what year this was?
I actually don't know what year this story took place, but it was told to me in 2018. So it would have had to be, I'd say, within the ballpark of like 2 or 3 years prior to that.
Okay. And why was she out there again? Did she go into detail about that?
She was asked to go out for an early morning mission, basically. Oftentimes when she had to do a meteorology run, she would have to get to the base between like 4 and 5 in the morning, simply because the aircraft, it was called the Sophia. They've since discontinued it, but that aircraft that they used to take up for meteorology missions used to have to leave around like 4 or 5 in the morning. So she'd have to get there super early, and this was a particular mission where they were being a little bit dodgy about like what the actual mission was for. She didn't end up telling me what it was after all, because I think that was classified. But because it was kind of like a more secret thing, they took her out there to this hangar in like a closed truck that didn't have like windows or anything. So she wasn't. She even said, she's like, for all I know, they could have been driving in circles for an hour. But yeah, she wasn't exactly aware of where she was.
And did she describe in detail about her sighting when she was able to see these entities?
It was just that, like I said, it was like kind of a brief moment. It was a glimpse, and before she could see them more clearly, because it was so dark, the doors had closed. And then she asked questions about it, but everybody was kind of dismissive of her questions. And that's all I know. But it is intriguing, isn't it? I mean, you hear this and you're like, wow, like what? I want to know more. I wanted to know more. But the more I asked her, the more I realized that she herself was in the dark about a lot of it. She was just the messenger, and she just happened to see something. Um, and to this day, I still don't, I have no idea what it was. But it is a fascinating story. It is like one of the craziest things to come out of my time there, that like I was fully expecting to have sit down and have this conversation with her where she's like, aliens? Pfft, no. And then she ends up telling me this kind of like seemingly outlandish, like sci-fi movie plot. But yeah, that was her truth.
I know about this. The audience may not, but we both share love for comics. So
Yes.
tell me about your comic collection. What do you collect and how did you get into this?
So, primarily now in my adult life, I collect a very, very specific subset of Marvel comics, and they're Barbie comics. Mattel and Marvel had a collaboration for a very, very brief time in the 90s where Mattel basically commissioned Marvel to create these Barbie comics. It's funny, I'm actually looking at several of them on my wall right now because I usually have them on display. I rotate them based on the season. Right now, I'm looking at a Halloween one that I definitely need to change out. But you know, it was a very limited run of a few years that they did these comics, but you can find them in comic stores here and there. My original interest in comics actually started when I was a child. I inherited a comic collection from both of my parents, who independently had been collecting Archie comics in their youth. And Archie comics were very popular, interestingly and kind of randomly, in India, and they would often arrive in India like 10 to 15 years after their published date, but they'd be completely intact. I mean, I'm assuming that these were probably copies that just never sold overseas, and, you know, maybe they were overstock. I have no idea how they ended up in India, but they would circulate in like the railroad stations that's for some reason, particularly where both of my parents independently ended up getting a lot of them. Like their family would go on a trip and have to take a train across the country somewhere, and then their parents would be like, okay, you can go pick two or three Archie comics to bring on the train with you. And then they would, collect them. And they had both independently also been taking very good care of these comics over the years and keeping them in a box safely in India. So when I started showing an interest in these comics when I visited India for the first time, they were like, we should just bring these back and you can just keep reading them. So I inherited like some, I don't know, 100 comics. And then from that point forward, I started collecting them. And anytime I would go to India, I would also find them no longer in the railroad stations, but they have specific stores that specialize in Archie comics because it was so popular in the 70s and the 80s. And there's like definitely an element of nostalgia. So much so that there's actually a Bollywood movie franchise based on the Archies that takes place in India. And they've like adapted the entire storyline of Riverdale into like a fictional town of Riverdale in India. Um,
Whoa.
so that was kind of the inciting incident for me. And something that I really love about Archie comics is that they are so silly and don't take themselves very seriously. And it's like when you look at childhood TV shows now, sometimes you pick up on these innuendos that are like clearly meant for the parents who are in the room when they're watching it. And Archie comics are kind of similar in that way, where like now as an adult, I read them with a new lens and I'm like, huh, that's actually pretty funny, pretty saucy, but I would never have known as a kid.
Yeah, there's as I was telling you earlier, there's a whole a collection of Archies known as inappropriate Archies. Uh,
Mm.
to those of you listening, you can Google that and you can find a bunch of these innuendo covers. It's quite quite interesting what they got away with back in the
It's
day.
pretty funny, yeah.
Yes. What can we expect next from you and Guptana Studios?
What can you expect from me in the future? Well, I have creative directed a visual album for my friend Mosiah. He is releasing an EP in the coming year, and we created a visualizer that spans the entirety of the album, and it's fully animated. And we took 3D models of Mosiah in like we got 3D scans of him made at a studio in New York and brought those into Unreal, and we have an amazing animator who's been working on that alongside us, and I'm very, very excited for that to be released. So when it's out there, you will know. That's something that I'm really excited about. And then also, I am applying to grad school, so send me your well wishes for that. I'm in the process of sending my applications. Who knows? Maybe that might open up an entirely new avenue for Guptanya Studios. And I did touch upon my interest in filmmaking and screenwriting, and that's definitely something that I will be exploring in 2026. So rest assured, you will be seeing a lot more from me and probably in the video space.
You're going for more education. You've already mastered the world. What could you possibly what could you possibly be pursuing?
I am actually really interested in virtual production, particularly in the volume. I don't know if you're familiar with the volume wall or this technique of filmmaking that involves these sound stages where the ceiling and the wall and the floor are all made of LED panels. So instead of green screen, you use the volume and it creates these really hyper realistic shadows and reflections and really makes it look like your subjects are in the space in like a completely artificial environment or one that has actually been shot in 360. And you can map out the movements of the camera to the background and the subject to make it all look super cohesive. And I had the privilege of actually working on a production that used the volume. I was in a TV show. I was in this true crime documentary where we recreated a crime scene inside one of these sound stages, inside the very soundstage that was used to produce The Mandalorian, actually, in Culver City Studios. And when the cameras weren't rolling and I wasn't in front of it acting as the talent, I was very much on the sidelines talking to the crew and trying to understand how this technology worked because it's so fascinating and so cool. And there is a program that just launched at NYU. It's the Martin Scorsese Virtual Production Center, and it is a graduate program that essentially teaches students how to produce anything inside the volume. They've built a volume of their own in Brooklyn, and I'm really hoping that I get to go back to my alma mater and explore this truly, intersection of art and technology. I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that.
I wish we could keep the conversation going and going and going, but we can't. But for listeners who want to follow your journey or learn from your work, where's the best place or platform for them to find you online to start? Is it TikTok? Is it Instagram? Where is it?
Primarily, you can find me on Instagram at guptanya.jpg. You can also find me on TikTok, that's guptanya.mp4. And for anything else, you can find my website, that's guptanya.com, guptanya.com, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
All right. There you have it, folks. So I posted all of that in the show chat. It'll be in the show notes for those of you listening on demand. That about wraps it for this episode of Spotlight Sessions. I again want to thank my guest, Tanya Gupta, for joining us tonight to discuss this incredible career journey. Be sure to connect with her on LinkedIn, on Instagram, TikTok. Visit her website, like she mentioned earlier. There's so many incredible resources out there for you guys. And it starts by connecting with these professionals in the creative space. We've made it easy to do here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord, but also check out the apprenticeship program, the commission projects. That's how you get your foot in the door. It's incredible what we have here just for you. So if you've enjoyed this program, just catch all the latest updates for the next Spotlight sessions and the incredible content we have here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord by following the upcoming events calendar at the top of the server so you can see what's coming next. I also want to thank my new producer, Catherine Chu, Lisa Temple, live moderator, Elizabeth, and the entire Adobe crew for sponsoring this program and helping to bring it alive. And thank you, Discord community. And to everyone who tuned in to listen to me, your host, Justin Bamforth. You can always catch me on Discord, LinkedIn, or my website, justinbamforth.com. Until next time, everyone, take care. For more conversations with creative professionals, subscribe to the Spotlight Sessions podcast or check out the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Links are posted in the show notes.